Get into that place. Because there's so much like each air hour is so expensive.
That's in the back.
During the hearing, photography is limited to accredited presence only and no flash. Thank you so much. Everyone can take their seats. We're going to be beginning shortly. Thank you.
Because it sends a message.
Okay, let's get this show on the road.
I'm at 12.
I'm waiting for him. Oh, yeah. The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today in McAllen, Texas, to examine the crisis on the Texas-Mexican border regarding unaccompanied children. First, I'd like to thank everybody, including the witnesses and Governor Perry, for being here today. I also would like to thank South Texas College for their hospitality in hosting us here today, and Dean Mario Reyna as well. I appreciate the effort taken on behalf of all those involved to have this important field hearing. This isn't an official congressional hearing as opposed to a town hall meeting, and as such, we must abide by certain rules of the Committee on Homeland Security and the House of Representatives. I kindly wish to remind our guests today that demonstrations from the audience, including applause and verbal outbursts, as well as the use of signs or placards, are a violation of the rules of the House of Representatives. It is important that we respect the decorum and the rules of the committee. I've also been requested to state that photography and cameras are limited to accredited press only. Before I recognize myself for an opening statement, I ask unanimous consent that the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Granger, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gene Green, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold. It's good to have a lot of Texans here today. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Salmon, be permitted to sit on the dais and participate in today's hearing, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, as well. And without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that a written statement from Texas Border Coalition be included into the record. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Here in Texas, we are facing an escalating refugee and national security crisis. Since October, more than 50,000 unaccompanied minors have crossed our southern border into the United States. Nearly two-thirds of those crossed here, right here in the Rio Grande Valley sector. CBP estimates that next year more than 150,000 unaccompanied children may attempt to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. These children are being exploited by the drug cartels who are turning a profit by smuggling these kids into the United States at a cost of $5,000 to $8,000 per child. Many are under the age of 10, traveling thousands of miles along through Mexico from Central America on buses or so-called death trains. These children are often subjected to beatings, starvation, sexual assault, and are at risk of being trafficked. As a father of 5, I cannot fathom handing my child over to a criminal element and setting them out on this long and dangerous passage. When they arrive in the United States, they are told to turn themselves into the nearest Border Patrol agent. Border Patrol stations like the one we saw here today in McAllen become holding facilities until these minors can be moved to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio or another appropriate shelter. But the point is, our military bases are turning into refugee camps. I never thought I would see this in the United States of America. And we saw 3 children, younger than my kids, 7, 8, and 9, with their grandmother, mothers in Pennsylvania, all in tears crying. And I have to say on a personal level what an impact that had for me to see that just as a human and the human compassionate element to this. But I believe that it's our policies driving this migration into the United States. It is obvious that the Department of Homeland Security is currently not adequately prepared to deal with this influx of unaccompanied children. This has left state and local officials to fill the void, and it takes the Border Patrol away from their main mission, and that is securing the border. This week, the White House started the process to request additional funding and measures to address this crisis, including the additional authority to remove these Central American children as well. In addition, the White House wants to enhance penalties for smuggling children, similar to legislation that I introduced last week. I look forward to reviewing the details of the President's requests. To fix this crisis, the administration must first recognize that its failed immigration and border policies are the source of this problem. At the hearing I held in Washington last week, the committee heard repeatedly that the horrible economic conditions and violence in Central America were the only reason why these children are coming. No one questions the fact that the circumstances in these countries are terrible, but these conditions are not new, and they have not suddenly gotten worse. What is new is a series of executive actions by the administration to grant immigration benefits to children outside the purview of the law. A relaxed enforcement posture, along with talk of comprehensive immigration reform. Just this week, the President defiantly vowed to take more administrative actions on immigration very soon. Such unilateral actions and failed policies, in my judgment, are what caused this dire situation here in Texas in the first place and could cause it to be worse. The message these policies are sending is that if you come, you can stay. This makes its way back to Central America, and more children are being put in the arms of the cartels. In fact, newspapers there seem to be encouraging illegal immigration based on these policies. And recent internal DHS surveys of these children reveal that more than 70% believe they're going to remain here in the United States. And in some ways, this is true. While these kids and families are given notices to appear, the reality is that it will take years to work through the immigration system. To break this cycle, we need to send a message of deterrence. First, mandatory detention, and then we should explore ways to properly return those who come here illegally. Not doing so puts more young lives at risk of exploitation, like the children we saw here today. In addition, we should also better engage with the government of Mexico to step up their efforts to secure their southern border. We appropriate millions of dollars to Mexico for this purpose. The problem begins with Mexican officials who turn a blind eye to Central Americans who cross the porous Mexican border. And I urge the President of Mexico at this hearing and his Interior Minister to get serious about securing their southern border as well. Securing the border is the obligation of the federal government. States should not be required to protect what is the federal government's responsibility under our Constitution. But in spite of that, Governor Perry has boldly recently announced that he will surge border security operations along the border to make up for the administration's failures. The President needs to immediately send the National Guard to the southwest border to free up Border Patrol agents so they can perform their primary mission, and that is securing the border. Drug cartels and other criminals have and will continue to exploit any weakness in our border security efforts. We must stem the flow and stop children from being subjected to this dangerous and sometimes fatal journey. I look forward to hearing from Governor Perry and our other witnesses here today about the situation on the ground and what more DHS and the administration and the Congress can and should be doing to address this problem. The details from today's hearing will be incorporated into the findings of the Speaker's Working Group, chaired by Congresswoman Kay Granger, and established to investigate and make recommendations in a solution-oriented way to address this crisis. And finally, we saw the heroic actions of our Border Patrol here today. I've seen them over my countless years of dealing with this issue, trying to resolve this issue, and I just want to thank them for their efforts day in and day out in what is oftentimes a thankless job for what I consider to be the heroes that we have alongside our southwest border, and also for the compassion and the care that they provide these children crossing. I can only imagine, as a father and as a human, what runs through their mind on a daily basis dealing with children and oftentimes babies that we're finding at these detention centers. So thank you not only for myself, but I know I speak on behalf of this entire delegation. We thank you for your heroic efforts. The chair now recognizes the acting ranking member, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee, for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for your courtesies of extending me the time as a ranking member of this subcommittee, and I give you greetings from the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Thompson. You ended just as I would like to begin, and that is, Governor, to thank all of you here in the state of Texas that have always risen to accept the challenge. And it is my personal commitment, along with my colleagues, that as the President has put forward the $2 billion to address this humanitarian crisis, that Texas will stand in the very noble position to receive the funding necessary for reimbursement, but to continue some of the hard work that you've already engaged in. We thank your Department of Health that has been absolutely unending, your DPS, Texas Rangers, and very grateful that you have offered your commitment. You know that we worked together during Hurricane Katrina. And again, Texas opened her heart to receive those who were in great need. So let me acknowledge that the federal government is doing its work. I think that is going to be my role today, but that we can always do a better job. And so I do want to take note of the Border Patrol and thank them for the work they've done in 207,000 arrests from fiscal year October 13 and ongoing. They have not diminished in the assignment that we have given them. ICE, on the other hand, likewise, last year 107,000 deportations, this year in this region, now 115,000. I think it is a failing concept to suggest that the federal government is not doing its job. But we have an humanitarian crisis. And let me just for a moment acknowledge State Representative Tony Dale here in Texas, State Representative Alan Fletcher, and let me acknowledge the chairman of the board of South Texas. I know these are all constituents of Congressman Vila, who I'll acknowledge, Rose Benavides. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Swalwell of the San Francisco Bay Area. Thank you for being here. Mr. Gene Green of Houston, thank you. And our own Congressman Philemon Vila, who has been here throughout this time frame, and he has been working in his district. He represents all throughout the Rio Grande Valley. And we want to acknowledge Senator Hinojosa, who is here as well. Let me thank you so very much for all that you all have done. So I believe that this is a humanitarian crisis. And I know in Washington we use the term humanitarian. And I think we need to continue to use that terminology, because if we look and do our homework, we will find out that according to the United Nations, we don't have to make it up. These children have been forcibly displaced. Anyone, as my chairman has indicated, that has spent time loving and hugging and seeing these children, listening to the Border Patrol agents, as I've done going from Harlingen to McAllen and Brownsville, going out on the Rio Grande and going up and down, seeing the hard work that Border Patrol is doing, but they will tell you these are the most orderly, behaved children who simply want an opportunity to be free from the murderous conditions of which they flee. I ask the question, is not America that great? As we are on the edge of the 4th of July, a time that reflects all of us fleeing from those of our ancestors, fleeing from persecution, and then announcing the greatness of this nation, are we not able to address the humanitarian crisis? I think we are. And so let me offer to you something that cannot be refuted. The 3 Central American countries have among the highest per capita homicide rates in the world, with Honduras stopping the list and the other 2 nations in the top 5. When the bishop testified in Washington, D.C., Governor, he indicated that he had spoken to individuals who had in fact said to them that their children would be killed dead in the spot if they did not join a gang. What would any of us do as parents? We would take them and we would flee. Now let me make it very clear. The South Texas region needs our help, and they have done an enormous job. The Baptist Center, the Catholic Charities and Sacred Heart that we were able to visit, and even the volunteers that have been able to come into the detention centers, they have done a magnificent job. But it is very important to know that a massive deportation policy for children and a mandatory detaining for children is not a humane thing to do. We must find a way to follow the law. Republicans voted for the law in 2008, and that is the law that transfers these children to Health and Human Services. Now maybe we need added help. We are all across America looking for facilities, and I might add that there are people raising their hand. I spoke to people in Dallas. I've spoken to people in Houston. I imagine there are people beyond our boundaries ready to offer these facilities so these children can go through the normal court proceeding. I am ready to provide funding for more ICE officers, more resources for the Border Patrol, more help for the state, but in particular the Border Patrol, that gives them more technology, that gives them more resources down here on the border, that adds more ICE officers for transport and other necessary ERO responsibilities, more immigration judges, and more infrastructure work is what we are prepared to do. But I do believe that we should be cautious in rushing to judgment on any form that would detain children. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm here to listen. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to hear from very distinguished members as well as our governor and well as Bishop Sees, who was there before. But I do want to end on this note. I always like to take things when I visit people who are detained for reasons that are not of a criminal nature, whether it is to visit with those in Darfur or to be able to engage in Afghanistan or to be able to talk to children wherever they are, homeless children. These are lollipops. I took lollipops along with my colleagues into those detention centers where children were. I wasn't armed. I wasn't fearful for my life. This is not a national security crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis. And so the question is, how can we, as good Americans and Republicans and Democrats, do what the chairman has said, be able to have in place an orderly process that people will know that crooks and criminals and thieves and smugglers and traffickers who are lying to them in Central America cannot be coddled. That's who we should go after. But the children should be given the basic coverage of the law that is in existence today that will allow us to treat them in a humane way. I hope this hearing will give us the additional insight to be able to do this. I do believe that the United States is doing and following the law, but we need to do better, and I look forward to doing so as we proceed in this hearing. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. I'd like to associate myself with your remarks with respect to thanking our Department of Public Safety. Steve McCraw, thank you for your efforts. Our border sheriffs, the Catholic Church. I had a good visit with the bishop last night about their role in terms of deterring these children from making the journey in the first place. I'll end with this. The three little girls that I talked to with their grandmothers this morning on the river, on the raft, literally got turned over and fell into the water and almost drowned. These girls were traumatized. They were crying, and they wanted to go back home to Guatemala. We don't know what their future lies ahead of them, but I think the better route is to stop it in the first place. With that, I'd like to introduce Governor Perry, longest-serving governor of the state of Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and to each of you, thank you for coming. This is a historic moment, and many of you I've had the privilege to work with for a long time. Gene, you and I in the House of Representatives back some 20 plus, almost 30 years ago. Sheila, 20 years worth of working with you. And Mr. Chairman, I cannot think of an individual who I would rather have sitting in the chair of Homeland Security than yourself, because of your background, because of who you are, your passion. And Kay, I want to say to you in particular, thank you for leading the Speaker's Working Group on Humanitarian Crisis on the southern border. And sometimes the public doesn't think we work together too well. I might have been critical of Washington a time or two. And, but the fact is, this is an opportunity for us as Americans, but not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, to deal with an issue that the world is watching. And again, I just want to say thank you in a very heartfelt way for coming to the border of Texas, not only to see this humanitarian crisis that faces us, but also to find the solutions. And Senator Hinojosa and I have had the privilege to work together for some 30-plus years and to find solutions. And we play on a different team on the political side of things. But we have worked together so many times to find solutions to challenges that face us as a state. And that's how I look at this one, is working with you as our federal partners and finding ways and solutions. And let's make no mistake about it. This is there's more than one crisis happening on the U.S. border. The first, as has been very eloquently on display here in just the first two speakers, is a humanitarian crisis. This is a, Michael, as you and Sheila, as you all have seen yourselves, just the power of this, of what's going on, of this growing number of individuals who are crossing our border illegally, and so many of them are children. And last week I too was here at the McAllen facility, and Kevin took us through, and we saw these children are being housed while they await action by Washington. And whether it's the right decision from my perspective to immediately deport them, or the short-sighted and tragic decision to essentially turn them loose in the United States, some may think by allowing them to stay here that it's a more humane option, and I assure you it's not. And let me share with you why I think that. Nobody's doing any of these children the slightest favor by delaying a rapid return to their countries of origin, which in many cases is not Mexico. Allowing them to remain here will only encourage the next group of individuals to undertake this very, very dangerous and life-threatening journey. And those who come must be sent back to demonstrate in no uncertain terms that risking your lives on the top of those trains in the ways that they are coming here, it's not worth that. Even those who have survived this very treacherous journey are still at risk. We've already had one confirmed case of H1N1. David Lakey, Dr. Lakey, can address that if you need some more information about that. And we have been informed by our federal partners of 2 additional cases of type A influenza that are likely to be H1N1, in addition to reports of other illnesses and diseases that you all have read about. This second crisis that's going on this border is one of national security. The rapid influx of illegal immigration has strained the Border Patrol and the resources that they have and that we have put on ourselves as a state. And frankly, they're already insufficient for the task at hand. Officials who should be guarding the border are dealing with the overflow instead of fulfilling their primary task. So as a result, the border between the U.S. and Mexico is less secure today than any time in the recent past, which is exactly the reason that the Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker, and I, and the members of the legislature ordered this additional surge that Director McCraw is overseeing, as well as John Nichols with the National Guard. We know that the drug cartels and these transnational gangs are already seeking to take advantage of the situation. They're attempting to circumvent security and spread this pain and suffering on both sides of the border through their criminal activities. We're also in danger at the hands of those who might be slipping through from countries who have known terrorist ties. A wide range of potential threats that are facing us from abroad. This is not the time to be distracted by something else. That's why Texas has taken the steps to supplement its law enforcement operations along the border. Currently, we are directing an additional $1.3 million over and above what we've already put into place. I might add, this is in addition to $500 million that the state of Texas has already expended on border security since 2005. This is not a new issue for us. Our current operations include increased DPS aircraft patrols, maritime operations, utilization of the Ranger recon teams. These are folks who are very quickly able to respond to areas where suspected activity is taking place. Madam Jackson-Lee, I readily and welcome the funding President Obama has publicly announced. But I also ask the following things of the federal government. First, increase the Texas National Guard units that are involved in border security operations. That includes, and Kay, you and I have worked together to keep some aviation assets here in the state because we know how important those are, but to keep those Lakota UH-72 aircraft in Texas in this operation. Second, if the U.S. Border Patrol is going to release illegal immigrants into our communities to await a court date, every one of them needs to be medically screened to ensure their health and also the health of our citizens as well. Third, Texas needs to be reimbursed for the $500 million plus that we've spent securing the border over the past decade. We have been fulfilling a federal responsibility, and the hardworking people of the state of Texas shouldn't have to shoulder that cost by themselves. And finally, my message to President Obama is to secure this border, Mr. President. Finally, address this issue and secure this border. Invest sufficient resources to put an adequate number of Border Patrol agents on the ground permanently. Utilize existing technology, including drones and other assets that we know. We know how to do this. Steve McCraw can share with you how to secure that border. So we've done it before. So again, I want to say thank you to each of you for loving your country and your respective states in your service in the United States Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. We appreciate your efforts, your leadership. The state of Texas has stood up where I think the federal government has failed in this border security effort. I do think with the crisis comes a call to action. And so I agree with you. Now is the time. Now is the time to finally secure the border. We've been talking about this, Steve McCraw and I, many, many years. It's time to get it done. And I can't think of a better reason to do it. I want to go back to a letter, Governor, you wrote in 2012 to the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And I think you recognized before anyone early on what was getting ready to happen. A very prescient letter where you stated every day of delay risks more lives. And you're talking about the unaccompanied children issue. At that time, 5,000 minors had crossed. You said every child allowed to remain encourages hundreds more to attempt the journey. Our country can no longer provide the temptation for these unaccompanied minors to engage in this tragic and illegal migration. To end it, the federal government must stop new arrivals at the border, repatriate those already here, and prevent and discourage others. To prevent this tragic and illegal migration. This letter was sent in May of 2012.
May, a little over 2 years ago.
What response did you receive from the President of the United States?
We haven't yet. And this is a bigger issue than just the UAC issue. And I mean, we've partly because we live with this every day here. I mean, those of us who have spent time in the state, particularly as individuals who live on the border, and so we had a Border Affairs Committee in 1999, Chewy, that we put together because we realized that this was an area of the state that had frankly been overlooked for way too many years from Austin, Texas. And Chewy and Eddie, Lucio, and others who have been just champions of supporting from El Paso to Brownsville, the entire border region of Texas. And so bringing to the attention of Washington, and not just this administration, but previous administration as well, some of the challenges that we have here, particularly with border security. But this issue of the children was the first time it was brought to our attention over 2 years ago. And again, hindsight is always a lot clearer, but had we addressed this diplomatically, had we addressed in El Salvador and Honduras and in Guatemala and in Mexico, as well as on the border with the securitization of this border, we would most likely not be here today with the tragic events at hand with these children who are now coming in massive numbers because they think they've been told, they've been manipulated, they've been threatened that if you will come here, you can stay in America. And we are a country of laws, and we have to respect those laws. And if we do not today clearly send the message of you cannot come into the United States just because somebody is handing out a flyer, then this is only going to get worse. And a humanitarian crisis will turn into a monumental tragedy for those children, and I will suggest to you for citizens along this border, because these great men and women of the Border Patrol are being distracted from their primary responsibility of defending and securing this border from some pretty evil people. And we cannot afford that, and they have to have some relief, and they have to have some support.
And thank you, Governor. I would submit that had these warnings been heeded 2 years ago, that perhaps we wouldn't be having this conversation here today. You know, as a father, as a former federal prosecutor, deterrence works. A message of deterrence does work, as you said. If the message is, we're open for business, you can come in, you can stay, they'll continue to come until we send a different message. I'd like to pivot to going back to, again, a crisis, but a call to action, securing the border. You call for the deployment of the National Guard. I agree with you, sir. I know you sent a letter to the President. So have I. I've had extensive discussions with Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson. We're fortunate to have the Adjutant General of the National Guard sitting behind you. We need to do that. But we need to do it in a way where the National Guard can do their job, what they're trained to do. I think the frustration has been whether it was Operation Jumpstart or Phalanx. Even though it's under Title II authority of the governor and the state, they've been relegated to essentially pushing paper behind desks. Yep. And what I'm concerned with in this situation, they'll be processing children rather than doing what I think they can do best, and that is get the border secure and working with Border Patrol in a law enforcement capacity as well. I know you've called for that in a letter. I know you can activate them under Title 32. There is a Department of Defense policy, unfortunately, out there that states that they cannot be used in what's called an operational role, but rather a supportive role, which would be, again, pushing paper behind a desk and processing children. My question to you is, we can change a policy. If we really get to the administration's attention that we need to change that policy, people in this state want the National Guard down there to do the job they can do. Can you tell me what your position is with respect to that DOD policy?
Right. Obviously, we have requested for, I think since 2009, 1,000 National Guard troops to be temporarily on the border until 3,000 Border Patrol agents could be trained to take their positions in a permanent way under Title 32, which obviously the state of Texas would not have to be picking up the cost of that, and appropriately so from my perspective. But Mr. Chairman, I would say, and I think General Nichols would share with you this in detail, as can Director McCraw. But the Border Patrol has been, the National Guard has been actively engaged here. They've been doing substantive operations here. We just don't have the numbers that we need. I mean, I think this goes back to the entire conversation that we need to have as finding the solutions, which is what I hope we're really all about here today as we go forward, is the boots on the ground. And both Steve McCraw and John Nichols will share with you that you can secure the border, because we've done it in sectors. We just don't, we have not had the resources and the manpower for a 1,200-plus mile border, which we are dealing with here. But we have those resources in this country. I mean, we can do this. I mean, I know we can do this. It's just a matter of having the forewithal, the courage, and the desire, because I know we got the resources too. And I think this is really not that difficult a task from the standpoint of how to do it. Do we have the will to do it? I think is the bigger issue here that we face as a country.
And I think the will is there certainly now. I will argue that they have been operational in a counter-drug, very
Yes.
limited role in counter-drug operations, but not in terms of a border security across the border. I think you would share my
correct.
feelings
That's correct,
and position that we need to expand that use. If we're going to deploy
Yes,
the
sir.
National Guard, let's let them do their job.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
On the border.
We do not need to have them have one arm tied behind their back in this process. I mean, if we really care, about this border that we know today is in fact being penetrated by individuals from countries that have strong terrorist ties, if we really care about protecting our citizens, we need to use all of the personnel that we have available to do that. I don't think any of us would, if we knew that there were bad people coming into our neighborhood, that we would not want the police to use every resource that they have to keep our citizens safe. And that's really what this is about. I mean, the unaccompanied children issue is a humanitarian crisis, and we know that. But they're being used. They're being used by very vile individuals to detract from the role of our Border Patrol and our other law enforcement. And that's what when your enemy changes tactics, then you're going to be forced to change your tactics too, or you're going to be defeated. And so this is a tactical issue that the drug cartels, from my perspective, are engaged in. And we've known about it for a couple of years, and I'll be honest, I don't think we've been quite nimble enough from a national security standpoint to deal with it. And that's really what, yes, it is a humanitarian crisis that is growing every day, but it is being driven by a national security penetration by drug cartels.
Governor, thank you for your leadership. Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Governor, thank you so very much for your testimony, and thank you for your concern. All of us as representatives are always interested in our constituents. You happen to have all of us in the entire state of Texas, and that means that you have the families and friends and local government officials that are here in this region. My colleague, Congressman Philemon, is the only one here at the table, besides my good friend, Congressman Farenthold, that are in the region, as I understand it. Some of us are in other places in Houston. And so I've taken the opportunity to listen to some of those voices over the years as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, and They are very jealous, if you will, about the richness of their community. They've had some challenges. Some of them are not for fences. Some of them have a great deal of confidence in the Border Patrol. Some of them are in agriculture. In fact, as we were on the Rio Grande, in the area there, we saw sugarcane coming up almost to the edge of the water. Those are challenges that the Border Patrol has, but that's private land.
Indeed.
So I would offer to just ask a simple question. Should we respect and engage with the citizens who are in this region about how we approach the safety and security of the border, even though it is a government responsibility, a federal government responsibility, and you have been kind enough to join in. But isn't that we should take note of, the different terrain in this area?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for bringing up the agricultural aspect of of this area of the state. For 8 years, I had the great privilege to be the agriculture commissioner. As a matter of fact, Sheriff's dad, D.V. Guerra, was one of my mentors. And there were some extraordinary individuals who I had the opportunity to work with. And as we have discussed how you deal with Mexico, which is our #1 trading partner, and the agricultural aspect of that, as this debate raged through the years of we're going to build a fence from Brownsville to El Paso, and people who don't know Texas, people don't understand the massive amount of lands, the private property that would be impeached upon, if you will, from the standpoint of their privacy.
So we should take that into consideration.
Oh, absolutely, you should take it into consideration. It is the reason that I would suggest that so many of the private landowners have been very, very open about allowing the Border Patrol to come upon their land. And actually, you as a side note, I wanted to share with you, one of the problems that we have here are some of these private these private preserves that are environmental preserves that have been put into place over the course of the last few years. And Mr. Chairman, it's something that I think the committee should take a look at, because they're not being allowed access, it's my understanding, by the Border Patrol and by the law enforcement, and they become somewhat havens. And listen, the drug cartels know these things very quickly.
If I might, Governor, and I have a short period of time, so I'm going to let you finish that sentence. I have some other questions for you. I appreciate it.
Great. But my point is that I think, I'm sure that we could go up and down the Rio Grande and find folks on both sides of this issue.
And my point is, the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes we offer suggestions from the federal government or the state government, and we're not engaging the local community. I want to get to the point of maybe taking issue with whether that we are as safe as we were pre-9/11 or pre-ramping up the Border Patrol. I've been on Homeland Security now for since the very beginning. Border Patrol agents were 4,000. They're now at 21,000. We get intelligence reports, and for a period of time we heard a lot about OTMs and the intrusion of individuals coming from the Mideast. I frankly believe the Border Patrol has control of that. And every Border Patrol agent that I spoke to and leadership over these 3 days indicated that they are decidedly safer today than we were before. So let me get to these children and ask the chairman, can I ask unanimous consent to put into the record H.R. 3887 that passed in the 107th Congress, I believe. And the words are for the Homeland Security Act, an unaccompanied alien child in the custody of the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall be promptly placed in the least restrictive setting that is in the best interest of the child. It gives discretion if the child is a danger to themselves, danger to the community, or risk of flight. All that I've heard over the past 3 days,
without objection, sir.
Thank you, that none of these children were a danger to themselves. I also have information that indicates that there is a 712% asylum application by Salvadorians, Guatemalans, and Hondurans, and not the same amount from those from Mexico that's been steady, Panama, Belize, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. The assumption is that they are coming from these countries because there is horrific violence, that there is a humanitarian crisis. So the question I would have, Governor, is can't we not balance our desire for security with the recognition that we have passed a law that is not a law that undermines national security. It is simply to provide for this possible influx of children that have come over a period of time. And it is not going to encourage more children to come. If these innocent children who are 5-year-olds, I can't believe they're calculating enough to think, I'm going to go here so I can inspire my other fellow classmates or babies to come, like the 2-year-old that was in a diaper who is totally without anyone, who we're trying to get placed as we speak today. That child could not be used as an example to encourage others. Can't we not find the kind of balance in humanitarian needs and also to provide the extra funding in this supplemental to help our Border Patrol? I just take issue, and I respect all of the thinking on this, but I take issue with the idea that our Border Patrol team is not well placed with resources to do their job.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I respect the National Guard.
You ask a really good question.
I would argue that the National Guard militarizes, if you want them to do their military assignments, it militarizes the border, and I don't know whether we have asked, well, that is an answer to children and whether or not it responds to what is not yet determined as to whether this border is so porous that we have terrorists coming through. I think we have that under control.
Right. I think if we stay focused on the only issue at hand that I'm hearing you talk about, which is the children, which is a humanitarian crisis we need to live with. We have multiple crises here. And speaking of balance, I totally agree with you. I would love to have a balanced approach when it comes to the Border Patrol. Because when you look at the United States border, from El Paso to California, there are 17 Border Patrol agents per mile dedicated to that region of the United States. From El Paso to Brownsville, it is 7 Border Patrol agents per mile. I am all for balance. Let's get Texas balanced when it comes to the number of Border Patrol agents relative to the rest of the country. 4,000 to 21,000. That's a good step in the right direction, but they're in the wrong place, I will suggest to you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Dr. Brown from Georgia.
Governor Perry, in your recent op-ed, you stated, quote, the root cause is Washington's failure, diplomatically and strategically, to address our border security and illegal immigration problem, unquote. This failure to develop a comprehensive strategy has resulted in border security which simply squeezes the balloon from one area of the border to another, while also failing to focus on the diplomatic efforts that are necessary, which would have an equal impact about addressing the problem prior to these individuals reaching our porous borders. And frankly, Governor, I blame 4 administrations, 2 Republican and 2 Democrats, for not addressing these issues. As governor, do you see this as a leadership problem on the part of the administration? And is it just this administration, or is it previous administrations as well, as I believe it is?
Well, this issue's been going on for a long time, and I'll be real honest with you. I'm tired of pointing fingers and blaming people. I hope what we can do is come up with some solutions here, because we know how. I mean, the fact is, we know how to secure the border. I mean, I can have Steve McCraw up here and probably in 15 minutes lay it out so clear to anyone, here is how you secure the border. And the question is this: do we, as the United States of America, believe in our rule of law, and do we believe that we need to have a secure border between the United States and Mexico? I do. I think that is I think that is one of the constitutional enumerated responsibilities of the federal government, to secure the border. I won't get off onto my 10th Amendment speech about getting out of our hair and a whole bunch of other stuff, but y'all already know that already. But my point is that we just need to have a discussion in this country. Do we need to have a secure border that will stop illegal activity or bring it to astoundingly low levels, as we have done in Texas when we have surged into those areas with our law enforcement, working with our Border Patrol and our federal counterparts. And we know how to do this. We just need the resolve, the resources of the federal government to do their constitutional duty.
Governor, I agree with you. Securing the border is absolutely the first and foremost thing that we need to do to deal with this humanitarian crisis as well as the national security issue that we face as a nation. And I disagree with my colleague from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, in that it is still a very real problem that this porous open border is also a very real national security risk. But going back to your op-ed, you talked about the diplomatic solutions. And, of course, with these kids, diplomatic solutions are going to have to play a part, not just securing the border. But we're going to have to work with the Mexican government, the government of the other Central American countries where these kids are coming from to try to help stop this flood, this so-called tsunami, to use a trite phrase, of kids flowing in this country. But in terms of the diplomatic efforts to strengthen our own border security, as you mentioned in your op-ed, where would you focus to have the greatest impact to stop this?
Obviously, we got a great working relationship in a lot of areas with Mexico. We probably have some areas that we can improve upon. And again, I haven't seen the focus on the North American region from a diplomatic standpoint. And I know I'm going to get off a little bit off a subject here, Mr. Chairman, but when I look at Canada and the XL pipeline, when I see Mexico and the opportunities on the energy industry with Mexico, and the lack of engagement, and frankly the lack of trust that we should be building up with two neighbors that ought to be our strongest partners, it causes me some concern. And so I don't know if the trust level between Canada and the United States, Mexico and the United States, is where it could be, or certainly where it should be. And so diplomatic relationships and using the leverages, but also using the personal relationships. And both of those are lacking from my perspective. I don't know, again, what's going on behind the scenes, but I haven't publicly seen the outreach that we've had in previous administrations with those, both Canada and Mexico in particular. And I just think that that's I hope that we can see an outreach and both leverage and, well, let's say a carrot and a stick may be needed here as we deal with this, because you cannot allow that many young people across your country on the back of trains and in buses and not know about it. A Marine can't go to Tijuana and be apprehended, yet thousands of young people are crossing the border with Mexico. There's some disconnect there. And we diplomatically have not engaged in that to the level of which I'm comfortable we could be if we really cared about that. Matter of fact, both of those issues.
Governor, I agree with you on that. I hope that our administration will start dealing with the Mexican government to get them to secure their southern border to prevent the flood through their country, as well as stop turning a blind eye towards the transit of these kids through the country of Mexico. I think it's absolutely critical that this administration start focusing those diplomatic efforts to do that. My time's expired. Thank you, Governor, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Vella from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, I want to begin by thanking you for your 16 years of service to this state, and also take this opportunity to thank you, Senators Hinojosa and Lucio, and the rest of the Texas State Senate.
Thank you.
And our House representatives. Representative Guerra was here earlier. I think he might have stepped out. For all you have done for South Texas, especially with respect to, we have 1.2 million people living here. We are a great American community, and with what you all have done with respect to the merger of the University of Texas Pan American and in Brownsville and Edinburgh, and the new medical school, and the feasibility of a SpaceX launching pad, that's something that you deserve thanks for. With respect to our presence here today, it seems to me that with respect to the National Guard, what I'm wondering is how do you think that would have prevented the influx? If we had 1,000 National Guard, at our border, as you would propose, how would that have prevented the influx of these unaccompanied children who, for all practical purposes, are surrendering themselves?
Yeah. And the power of boots on the ground, I don't think can be overstated. And the message needs to be sent very clearly. It's not a matter of once you come into the United States, you're going to be deported. This is, you're not going to be coming into the United States. And that's the, had in 2009 and in 2010, those 1,000 National Guard troops been upon the border, I will suggest to you their presence here, and then the ensuing training of the 3,000 Border Patrol agents to permanently take those individuals' place, because that was a temporary fix, if you will. 2012 would not have seen this great influx of young people coming, well, the beginning of this great influx in 2012 that we saw. It would not have happened. I would ask you, at the appropriate time, to have either, and particularly Director McCraw, share with you what we have seen from the standpoint of our ability to substantially lower the criminal activities along the border when we have surged into those places. And it's just like it's like a neighborhood watch, if you will. I mean, it's really some pretty common sense. When you have a substantial law enforcement presence in a particular site, you're not going to have the activities that of criminal activity, or for that matter, I don't think you're going to have this great influx of young people coming up here, because I truly believe this is manufactured to some degree by the drug cartels, because not only is it the drug cartel violence that's going on there and their intimidation and what have you, but it's also them organizing and pushing this caravan, if you will, into this area of the state.
We could probably debate those points all day long. Sir. So let me ask you this. You in your op-ed, you mentioned, this is what you said, what's happening along our southern border is a mounting tragedy. Its root cause being Washington's failure diplomatically and strategically to address our border security and illegal immigration problem, right?
I'm agreeing with you so far.
So would you agree that the humanitarian or the socioeconomic conditions and conditions of violence in Central America are also one of the root causes of the crisis that we're experiencing?
I don't argue that. As a matter of fact, I think that's what I said there, either directly or obliquely. But the fact is, we're wanting to draw this line and say, here's where we are, and we're going to have to continue doing what we've been doing and address the result of it. I would suggest to you that if you send a clear message that you are not coming into the United States, and if you are here, you're going to be, you're going to be cared for and get you back into traveling condition, and you're going to be sent back to where you're from, substantially stymie the flow that we have seen, because we know what was happening in 2012, and I want to say it's like 5,000, and then the projection for 2015 is 160,000. Philemon, I'm just going to tell you that unless the United States clearly sends the message of we are not going to allow for this unimpeded flow of individuals into our country, and you get here and you can stay here, then it will be a deluge. And after El Salvador and Honduras, what's the next group of people that decide to come here? I mean, do they start shipping people from other places in the world? I mean, there has to be a point in time where we stand up and say, we are going to secure the border of our country. We are going to be a rule of law. And if we don't do that, I will suggest to you that the American people will address this in a number of different ways, electorally and otherwise.
May I have one more,
No,
Mr. Chairman?
Very quickly.
Would you also agree at least that one of the root causes of the crisis that we're currently experiencing is also the fact that 85% of these children are coming here to be reunited with their parents? Would you agree with that? That the reunification factor is one of the root causes of what we're seeing?
I don't know whether those numbers are correct or not, but the issue at hand is not if we're going to address this flood of individuals who are coming to this country, whatever reason they're coming for. We cannot, as a country that respects the rule of law, allow for just basically the turning away from the legal system that we have in this country.
Mr. Bartoletta from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we're trying to deal with this on a federal level, but Mr. Governor, as a mayor of Hazleton for 11 years, I saw firsthand what a burden illegal immigration has on local government. When I saw our population grow by 50%, but our tax revenue stayed the same, realizing we had an illegal immigration problem, the quality of services suffered. On Monday, I helped sound the alarm to stop potential relocation of unaccompanied minors to a property in my hometown in downtown Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which had been identified as a potential housing facility. The United States Committee on Refugees and Immigrants has now stated that they're not looking at locations in Hazleton, but will continue to look for potential places across the country.
Have you been told where those are?
No, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. But I'm worried for a number of issues, not only for Hazleton, which is now not a problem, but for other cities. What are the health risks, in your opinion, to these children and to the community that they're going to be sent to? And do you know are background checks being conducted not only on the unaccompanied minors, but on the adults who will take custody of them? Do we know if they're predators? Do we know anything about them, if they're gang members associated with anything about their background? How long will the minors remain in the United States, and what impacts will there be on our public schools and other public services, including our health care providers? These are all local issues, real issues that small governments have to deal with. Can you speak on that based on your experience?
I think those are all very legitimate and appropriate questions for people in the other 49 states as well. And the reason I ask you that, Congressman, is because I don't think our government is being forthright, being transparent in the process that's going on. I think we've seen the reaction in Georgia, in California, in Pennsylvania, and I think you're going to see that in a lot of places across the country. And again, we're either going to be a country that respects our rule of law or we're not. We're going to be a country that is going to secure its border or we're not. And if we're not going to be either one of those, then the federal government needs to stand up and say, here's the way it's going to be. And my instincts are that the American people are not going to be particularly happy about that. They do want this to be addressed. They want it to be addressed thoughtfully. But securing this border is, until that is done, all of these other conversations that folks want to have about immigration reform or what have you are going to fall on deaf ears with this country. That's my perspective of when I go and talk to people across the United States.
I agree with you, and you know, the problem starts in Washington, ends up on the border, then ends up in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and across the country for everyone to try to deal with it. And what always stops me when someone wants to talk about immigration reform, I always go to the background checks, because as a mayor, I know what's involved in doing a proper background check. So how do we find information on individuals? I saw the human side today, beautiful, you know, these 3 beautiful little girls with their grandmother who risked their lives to come here, and I saw that and it broke my heart. But there's also the realist in me who also saw others, again, who could be here not for good reasons. And that's the ones I'm concerned about, because there will be innocent Americans every time who pay that price. And if we don't do the due diligence to make sure that we are not allowing people into this country that will harm Americans, which I believe is our first priority of government, is to protect the American people, then we're not doing our job. And that's where it stops for me. And I'm not convinced that we know enough about the children that are here. We talked about what the cause is. I do believe that most are here because there's somebody in the country here already illegally, which is the cause of not enforcing our immigration laws. We've created another crisis now with the children. So I want to thank you for coming in your perspective.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think this demonstrates how this crisis will literally impact, I think, every district across the nation eventually. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Governor. And
Yes, sir.
I came here not looking for placing blame, but looking for solutions. And at that facility this morning, I saw children, and I saw mothers holding their children. And I talked to a young El Salvadorian boy and asked him why he came here. He said he traveled alone, and he said he came here for a better life. He wasn't holding an invitation in his hand from President Obama. He didn't know what DACA meant. He didn't know what the Traveler Protection Act was. And so I understand in your op-ed you said that the root cause was the belief that they would be allowed to stay here. And so I just wanted to walk through some figures with you. And you would agree that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was passed in 2008. Is that right? 2008 it was passed?
Let your statement stand as fact.
And you'd agree that in 2008 only 7,500 unaccompanied minors came across our border?
That is factual.
In 2012, the President took executive action with the Deferred Action for Children Act.
Yes, sir. If where you're going with this is where
Governor,
I think you're going with it, here's what you
Governor,
need to understand.
I'll go
I've been the
there.
governor here for 14 years.
Governor, if you don't mind, yeah, I'll go there. But you agree that in
No, here's what I agree
2012,
to.
Governor,
the reason people
Governor,
are coming
if I may,
is
Governor,
because
I'll
the
ask the
border
question,
has
Governor.
not been secure.
Governor,
And
may I
until
ask
we
the
get the
question?
border secure, you are not going to see a stop of any people. As a matter of fact, you're going to see a flood. More than this. And I hope you will agree that the responsibility to secure the border is the federal government's, not the state of Texas, not the county of Hidalgo.
Governor, I would agree, but would you agree that after the Deferred Action executive action was taken, 25,000 or fewer, that was 2 years ago. Now today, in 2014, we're at 50,000, probably 80,000 by the end of the fiscal year. So is it your position that it has taken 2 years for the word of DACA to travel to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and 4 years for the Trafficking Victims Protection Act to travel to them, and that's the reason they're all coming here?
I think what has happened is the abject failure of the federal government to do its responsibility. And what you have seen is a catalyst that has been growing year by year, and people understanding that if you will get from wherever you are to the border of the United States, you can cross, and the federal government is not going to impede you from coming into this country and staying here. And that is why Americans are upset.
And Governor,
that is
you're
why
calling for
Americans are upset.
Additional Border Patrol agents. But during our briefing this morning, we were told this is not a matter of catching them, that these children are running into open arms. So wouldn't additional Border Patrol agents only increase the number of open arms that these children are running into?
I think I addressed that earlier when I said that when you have the National Guard, when you have a law enforcement effort, and frankly it gets back to the issue of whether or not we are going to have a diplomatic relationship with Mexico to the point of where they trust us, we trust them, and they secure their southern border. I mean, this isn't, I mean, if it's going to come down to we're going to put enough people on the border and put them on the border, I'm not talking about 40 miles back and apprehend. I'm talking about, and that's been our objective when we surged into to the border region, is put them on the border, have that law enforcement's presence there. And again, if the point is we're going to continue with the same old policies that we've had, and that we don't apprehend at this particular point in time and send those individuals back to where they're from,
And Governor,
160,000
you've mentioned this
and
a
then
couple times,
320,000.
sending them back to where they're from, and I appreciate that, because
Do you not agree that they need to be sent back to where they're from?
I do agree on a case-by-case basis. We do not want them to come here.
You agree that they need to be sent back to where they're from?
And I think, would you agree, Governor, that the challenge, though, is that where they're from doesn't necessarily cooperate with us, and we need to put pressure on Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador to receive them.
Absolutely, I agree with you on the diplomatic side. But you agree, I want you on the record here in front of God and everybody, you agree that they need to be sent back to the country they are from?
Governor, I agree. We can, on a case-by-case basis.
But I heard you say earlier, you agree that
children.
they need to be sent back to where they're from.
But I hope you understand that it's not as easy as catching a child from Guatemala and then just dropping them
Didn't say it was
on
going to
the
be
corner
easy.
in Guatemala.
This has never been easy. I've written the President since 2005 about the difficulties that we face along this border. The citizens of this region deserve to be able to live in a safe and secure area. And our responsibility as citizens, both as a state governor in my case and you as a congressman, is to secure this country. And sending young people back, if that is what we have to do to send the message, because if we don't, then the only alternative I see is instead of 5,000, then 8,000, then, I mean, the flow is not going to stop. And if we're going to be a country that respects the rule of law, and if we're ever going to have a conversation about immigration reform, which my bet is that you and I probably would like to see that happen, it'll never happen until you secure the border.
Right. And Governor, and I appreciate that, and thank you, Chair. And my point is that this is something more complicated than these children are coming because President Obama
It is an incredibly complicated
invited
issue,
them.
Congressman. It is an incredibly complicated issue. But I really believe that we can find a solution. And that's the important thing for me. And thank you again for being here. We can find the solution to this. I mean, we're smart enough, we're big enough, we're wealthy enough to find the solution to this. But we first must secure that border, because that's what Americans want us, demand that we do.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kay Granger from Texas.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor, for being here and for all you've done over all these years about this issue. This is the second time I've been to McAllen this week. traveled here just to personally see.
They'd like you back in 2 days.
Yeah, right.
Or tomorrow would be
Thank
good,
you.
4th of July celebration.
Yeah. I want to see what was being done here and what needed to be done, and we all did that way. I saw things I didn't want to see. I saw children that were kept in places that on dirty floors and sleeping without blankets and things that just we expect in Beirut, we don't expect here in McAllen, Texas. At Lackland, there were 1,200 children being taken care of. They were being taken care of very well. 600 boys on one floor, 600 girls on the other floor, 30 to a room, given good health care and checks. But I was traveling with the First Lady of Honduras, and she became very, very emotional. And I said to her, I said, if it were my country, I would hate to see the loss of the children from my country and all their futures and what they believed and what they were going to add, their talents. And she said that was exactly what she was thinking, of the huge loss. And I thought to those children, they're going to lose their culture, they're going to lose their family and their friends, and I'm afraid they're never going to be really united with their families. So I talked to her, and I said, and the next day I talked to the foreign minister of Honduras and said, I think we should send the children home. And she said, yes, she wanted the children to go home. But I said, I thought that if we did it right, we could work and put the children first, and we could get a situation where we sent them back home, but we helped Honduras keeping them safe. Some of the shelters that we've done, gosh, in Jordan and Lebanon, all sorts of places, and then work with that government to make the government make that safer so their children didn't want to leave and break the law. And I think that's possible. It ain't easy, just like you said. It ain't easy, but it certainly, it's possible. And I think with leadership like the leadership that you have exhibited, where you're very straightforward, you say, we're a country of rules, this is what we need to do, we need to back it up, and we need to let the people who are trained to keep us safe and to secure that border do their job in sufficient numbers to have a safe border. And I just think absolutely that is the direction we need to take. I think we need to do it very quickly, because we started out with 52,000, and now I don't know what we'll have when we start enacting laws. But I think that there's something we also need to do, and that's to try to stop it at this level so we can know who we're dealing with. I think the worst fear I have as I watch those 1,200 at Lackland get on buses, that we'll never see those kids again, and their families won't either. It's a dangerous, dangerous trip they took to get where they are. And for us to keep those children and say, we're going to return you to families, I think we all need to be very aware of the other dangers they have with human traffickers, with cartels. And so I think we need to also, in our thinking, take that to a different level. So I'd ask, of course, that your continued guidance and leadership in this. Thank you.
Any response?
I agree with everything she said, sir.
Smart man.
I always agree with Kay Granger all the time. That's always best policy. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Gene Green from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing those of us who are not on Homeland Security to actually participate. Governor, welcome.
Yes, sir.
You and I served together since sometime in the 80s, and I'm going to try and take my D hat off, and you can take your R hat off, because we'll have plenty of time to do that.
Yeah,
because I always was taught in the legislature that our goal is to do what's good for Texas. Just like as a member of Congress, I hope to do what's good for our country. I agree with what my colleague from Georgia said, securing our borders has been a challenge for decades. Although I have to admit, I love Texas history, and I'm sure glad the royalty in Spain and the governor of Mexico, they didn't secure the borders on the Sabine either back in the 1820s and 1830s. So we've had this problem for a long time. And it's easier said than done on securing borders.
I agree.
And I'm looking forward to Mr. McCall's statement on it, because I have never not voted in my 20 years plus in Congress, voted for expansion and more money for Customs and Border Protection. We've always done that. And I would think that we will continue to do it. In fact, in the Immigration Reform Bill, there was this committee, the Homeland Security Committee, passed bipartisanly, I think a much better part of that bill than the Senate did. Even though the Senate had a lot more money, I think this committee and Congressman McCall was smarter in doing it, and I would hope we could vote on that sometime. Let me get to a couple of things, though, that came up. First of all, one of your comments, your four statements, we were told now, and hopefully we will in a later panel, that every child who comes here is going to be tested for their health issues before they're released. And hopefully the next panel will guarantee that to us and just telling it to us. So the other thing is that, it's hard enough to do a background check on adults. There is no way we're going to do a background check on those three granddaughters we saw over there, from Guatemala. If somebody wants a background check on every immigrant, it's just not going to happen. It's just, you can't do that. We have enough trouble, the adults that come over, to having access to the files in those countries on someone. But so let me put that aside. I don't know of anything in the last 6 or 7 years that the president has said, you have a free pass to come to our country. The 2008 legislation was actually signed by President Bush and passed by a voice vote in the House of Representatives. So if we need to go back and change that, but I don't think that was an invitation to anyone. I think that was in response to what we're trying to do to treat children. And it's not unlike what we do in Texas. When I practiced law, if I had a juvenile case, that child under 17 years old went to juvenile court. They were treated much better in juvenile court than they were if they were 17 or older, because they went to adult court. So we tried on the federal level to do that, treat children as children. Now, we do know that in Central America we have gang problems, and some of the problems in those countries, I know El Salvador particularly, a lot of their problems is we've deported a substantial number of gangs from Texas, I'm sure, but also California, too, and rightfully so. I have a very urban district in Houston. We have enough homegrown outlaws. We don't need to bring them in, and so we need to deport them. But I don't know of anything the president said that said, this is open season. And frankly, I don't remember President Bush saying it either. It's been a challenge, at least I know while you've been governor, you had President Bush and President Obama. I don't think there's been an invitation. And I know in Congress, whether it's D's or R's that run it, we've increased border protection. We've increased border. Now, I do agree with you on one thing. I didn't know the statistic that we have fewer border patrol per mile. Mm-hmm. And I would like to use that as a standard, and we need to correct that.
Please do.
And because we need to have the same emphasis at California, Arizona, and the very small part of New Mexico that's a border. The other thing that in your letter you sent in May of 12, that Congress has increased border protection money since then, too. Now, it may not be spent. Now, you and I have some philosophical disagreements on the National Guard. I was with the National Guard in Iraq in our Texas units, in Army Reserves in Iraq and Afghanistan. They weren't doing border protection. They were doing, their military job. I think they can be used as a force multiplier, but I still want our Border Patrol doing their job. And I would much rather have a trained Border Patrol agent than a National Guard person there who's not trained to do what the Border Patrol is supposed to do. So I know I've heard the term, we're being invaded from Mexico. That's a little hyperbole. And if we are being invaded, then maybe we need to move the airborne division there, but that's not the case. People are coming here to work. They're coming here, and these children are coming for lots of reasons, including misinformation in their own country. But that's the other thing. Have you heard that there's been any suggestion by, whether it's Homeland Security Secretary or the President, to these countries in Latin America that said, you know, you can come in here. If you're a child, just come in and surrender to a Border Patrol agent. I have not seen that.
Can I address that?
Sure.
Gene, thank you. I think it's a bit more nuanced, the messages.
Oh, President Bush said we don't do nuance in Texas.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that, and let me just back up for a little history here. And I can't remember the dates of this, Steve. You can give it to me better. But there was a program that we refer to as Catch and Release. That got
and I remember that. And Congress actually worked hard to change
You
that.
did. But those are the nuanced messages that I'm talking about. You get caught, you get brought into San Angelo, Texas, and then you're given a summons that says show up for a court date, and everybody knows how that was going to turn out. Then, so both the citizens of this country and members of Congress were a bit outraged, and they addressed that. Then we had apprehend and get transported to somewhere else, maybe from you were apprehended on the Texas border, and then you got sent to Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are nuanced messages that if you can just get across the border, then you're gonna have an opportunity to, you know, move around, and you know the message gets sent. Gene, I really believe that there's some real, I mean, I don't think that's really nuanced, to be real honest with you. I think those are, no, the President of the United States didn't stand up and say, come and get, and I hope I haven't ever said that, and if I did, I needed to be more nuanced. But here, let me share with you. I never asked for the Border Patrol to come, or excuse me, I never asked for the National Guard to come and stay. What we asked for was 1,000 National Guard to come here in a temporary basis until 3,000 Border Patrol, which are trained every day to do what you and I both agree they need to be doing. And thank you for, you know, supporting the concept of Texas needs to have, you know, at least in equity per mile. If our border is going to be, I think our border is just as important as the other states that are our border states. Anyway, my point is, I do think that this nuanced messaging, and again, this has been going on for some time, and I'd just like to look for the solutions. We know what the problem is, and the solutions from my perspective, and again, Eric, we can, you know, and maybe disagree a little bit on the exact way to deal with it and what we're facing, but we know how to secure the border. Because I think if we will agree that we can put the resources on the border in an appropriate number, that a lot of these other issues will go away.
Well, I know I'm out of time, and I know we're trying to move along. I appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman, and I like your leadership on some of the Border Patrol and Homeland Security. So, and we'll work together to get it done.
Yes, sir. We will. We can do this.
Thanks, Gene. Chair recognizes Mr. Salmon from Arizona.
Thank you, Governor. A couple things. First of all, thank you for being here today. I went to the facility in Nogales, Arizona, about 3 weeks ago, where there were 1,250 children. At the time, it was the only facility of its kind, and it was a makeshift facility. First thing that happened when I walked in, and I'm not a real emotional guy, but I broke into tears when I saw what was transpiring before my eyes. We're talking a lot about these children and what's best for these children. I think that the point that you're making is one that we've got to focus on with a laser beam, and that is, ultimately, if we don't stop it now, the waves will keep coming. And how many of those kids aren't in the facilities? How many are not making it? How many are dying in the desert? I understand that 1 out of every 3 teenage girls is being raped as they make that journey. I understand that many of these children are being sold into slavery and some into prostitution, many of them. And if we don't
create a deterrent to stop that from happening, this untold carnage is going to continue to happen. And I happen to agree with you that actions speak louder than words. If they believe that these children are going to come here and they're going to bounce around the system until we bounce them out into their relatives, that some of them that are in this country that are here illegally, then it's going to keep coming. And it's going to come from Nicaragua, and it's going to come from other countries as well. And the carnage is not going to stop. And is that real compassion? I would submit it's not.
Good point.
The second thing that I'd like to point out is that just throwing money at the problem alone, $2 billion, that's what the president has asked for. If we don't have a focused plan, or if we don't let the CBP officers or ICE do their jobs, then that money's wasted. I talked to the CBP folks at that facility all the way down the line. Spent a whole day there with them. And they told me of the abject cause for their low morale, and that is that they're not allowed by this administration to do their job. They're cops. And yet what happens? So they find a family unit, and they drop them off at a bus station, and they give them a date to come back to court. And I said, well, how many of them come out for that court date? And they started to laugh, and they said, are you serious? None of them come back. They just stay. And the children, because of the 2008 law, they're guaranteed a hearing. And those hearings are taking anywhere from 3 to 7 years before the hearings can be accomplished. We've got to change that law. We have to. And treat the children that are coming from Central America just like we would treat the children coming from Mexico or Canada. Let's just make that amendment. The administration's asked for that. And if we do that, and we act through actions and not just words, let's dig that placard out that Truman had that said the buck stops here for all of us, for Congress, for the president. Let's say the buck stops here, and let's just fix it and stop this carnage from happening. And the last thing I'd like to say, and it's a question for you, the president just said a couple days ago that he's decided to go it alone on immigration reform, that he's frustrated with the way things have happened. Governor, do you think that if the president goes it alone and comes out through executive order and not involving the Congress, do you think that'll help or hurt the situation?
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating that the one place that the president really needs you, all of you, is on this issue. And it's because of the appropriation of the dollars. And you know, there have been some other issues that the president, I remember you talking about his pen and a phone, but that the president has bypassed Congress, and maybe he could or should, or I don't know, I'm not going to wade in. But this is the one time that I really think the president does need all of you, Democrats and Republicans alike, to be working with you and reaching out. Gene, I found, you left us and went to Congress, but Chewy, as the few times that I tried to do something without you, you spanked me pretty good, as I recall. And so one of the things that I have learned over my 14 years of being governor, and then the other 16 years of being a state rep and the other roles that I've had the privilege to play, was that an executive in government, the President of the United States or the governor of a state, can't go it alone. You're not going to be successful. And I hope that, you know, all of us will share with the president that we're willing to sit down and work with him. One of the reasons I asked him to come here, I want him to see this, because just like you, Congressman, I think if he walked in that Sally Port and he saw what all of you've seen, then he would realize that, you know, this is bigger than politics, this is bigger than, but it's not bigger than America. And that we could find the solutions to these issues and stop this tragedy that's occurring all across Central America and Mexico and into the United States.
Thank you, Governor.
Chair recognizes Mr. Olson from Texas.
Before I chat with my governor, I'd like to thank the Chairman McCall for inviting me to rejoin the committee and participate in this very important hearing. Thank you, my friend. Governor Perry, good afternoon. Whoop!
Howdy.
My wife Nancy couldn't be here today, but she ordered me to say thank you.
Yes, sir.
To you for your life of service to Texas, taking care of my family and 27 million Texans. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And knowing that you and I share a common bond as former pilots in the military, she had a call sign for you, Prosperity Perry. Has ring to it, doesn't it?
That's kind of a long call sign, actually.
Yeah, well, Prosperity, how'd that work out? Governor, I want to talk about
I
President...
kind of liked Maverick better.
Crossover from Air Force to Navy, I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk about President Obama's blindness to a crisis that threatens our state with a tsunami of disaster. You've authorized $1.3 million for DPS per week to get involved in border security. $1.3 million coming from Texas. As you know, you're not like us. You can only spend money you have. So, Governor Perry, you're going to have to come up with some money. If this goes on for 6 months, you have to come up with $33.5 billion. My question to you is, what's going to happen with other services? They have to be impacted. Any idea what's going to happen, Governor?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Texas is fortunate in the sense of its economy is doing better than most other states. Matter of fact, 37% of all the new jobs created since 2000, 37% of all the private sector new jobs created in the United States were created in the state over the last 13 plus years. So the state of Texas is in a surplus condition in its state government. But the fact is, from 2005, we all remember 2008, 2009, and I mean, even Texas wasn't immune to what happened in that particular period of time. We had to struggle, not as bad as other states. But the fact is, during that period of time, we were spending money on securing this border. We were diverting money that frankly could have been spent for transportation infrastructure. And I can promise you, Judge Garcia and Senator Hinojosa and Senator Lucio would have loved to have had some of those dollars in the FAR transportation district to have built some transportation infrastructure in this state. But public safety trumped that. And the legislature, and I think it was a fairly overwhelming vote to send that money for border security in 05, in 07, in 09, in 11, in 13, and it's over $500 million now that frankly was your responsibility. And again, I want to remind you that I've put a request in for you to pay it back. But you're absolutely correct. This is not the state's responsibility. It's not Arizona's responsibility. It's not New Mexico's responsibility. It's not Jerry Brown's in California's responsibility. We have a constitution that clearly enumerates the powers that are supposed to be dealt with by the federal government. And defending and securing this country's border is one of those.
Yes, sir.
And we're failing.
Yep. There's a bigger problem in this crisis, though, sir. As you know by law, when DHS gets a hold of one of these children, they have 72 hours to turn them over to HHS. And I've seen HHS up close on the Energy and Commerce Committee for the past year through their rollout of healthcare.gov. In my 51 years here on God's earth, I've never seen a greater debacle from the federal government. It was terrible. How can we trust these people to ramp up, deal with these kids coming across the border when they can't even get this bill up and running? They had 3 years to do that. They've got 3 hours, 3 days. How can we trust them as government? My point is, who else can do this? Yeah. Somebody in D.C., somebody in Austin, or local people?
I don't think this is the right forum to discuss the Affordable Care Act. So, but
Just an example of how
I
adept
know,
they are.
but I'm just saying, we know how to fix this, Pete. I mean, we know how to address this issue. And again, the next panel, you're going to have the opportunity to talk to some real pros, some people that I have extraordinary confidence in, men and women who have a plan. And again, it goes back to why I'd really like for the President to come, or to at least, and thank you all for coming again, I mean, for being here. But I wish someone from the administration would come and sit down with the men and women who have put the surge operations together over the course of these last 7 years. And not because we think we're perfect, but because we know it works. Kay, you were spot on when you talked about talking about just spending the money for the sake of spending the money, and it's not going to do any good. Having a plan. And we will be happy to sit down and show them how we in Texas have done this. And my bet is we've probably done it in a fairly efficient way. I mean, since '05, and again, we've only surged into areas of the border, and I think that's important to keep in mind, because when we're going into 300 miles versus 1,200 miles, there's some substantial cost increases. But since '05, and we've been able to surge into these areas and drive down substantially the amount of activity, criminal activity, and done it for $500 million, $500 million, which is a lot of money. But compared to the $2 billion that the President says, I'm going to make available, then I think there's some scalability here, and I think there's some partnering here that we don't want to miss out on. And frankly, that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is to offer this expertise. If there's a state that's had more experience of dealing with this issue, and I might add doing a pretty good job of dealing with the issues at hand with our surges, if there's somebody that is any better or more experienced, I'd love to have them sitting at the table with us as well. But I think it's really important for us to leave here with some solutions in our minds about, here is a way to address this, and here is an avenue for us to address.
I agree with you, and that's why we're here. And Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Renee Elmers, her first trip to the border.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to come along on this trip, not being a member of Homeland Security Committee. And thank you, Governor Perry, for your leadership to the state of Texas and your willingness to be a leader on this issue of immigration. Obviously, as you have pointed out, we have to start with the border. And although many disagree on the path that we need to take for immigration reform as a whole, I think everyone that I have spoken to, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of who you are, what state you live in, everyone agrees that the border has got to be secure, and obviously you are ground zero for that action. I bring greetings from our governor, Pat McCrory, and I know he is a good friend of yours.
Yes, I hope I'm not on the phone with him before the day's up with offering services for a hurricane.
Thank you, yes.
But we will be if that's what's required.
Well, thank you, and we are certainly all praying that that will not be the case. But obviously in North Carolina, we do not have the hurdles that you have here in Texas with the border situation. But just as so many of the other states and areas are affected by the migration of these individuals coming across our border, so too is North Carolina. And I know I am one, as you are, and you have pointed out numerous times that we are here to find solutions. I'm here to find solutions on immigration in general, but especially because of this humanitarian crisis that we're experiencing, and coming here to learn and seeing it firsthand so that I can bring this back to my constituents and hopefully be a voice on this issue as well. To some of our colleagues, We have talked a lot about what might have occurred to create some of the situation. And like you, I'm looking for solutions. I don't want to finger point. But I think you just simply can't ignore in our binders, page 7, when table 1, which talks about the number of unaccompanied alien children apprehensions from 2008 to 2014, you can see the numbers, and you can see where they are escalated, and you can see what policy was put in place at that time, and then you can see a result. And whether the result was because it was written in stone that way, or whether it is because it was perception and then perception became reality, that is what we have been dealing with. And so now we do have to find the solutions. And sir, one of the things that, again, getting back, and I'm just going to come off of what my colleague, Mr. Olson, was talking about, the 1.3 million a day that you have directed your Department of Public Safety to allocate. You're talking about dealing with, I guess at the more local level, illegal immigration and drug trafficking. How has this changed the dynamic? And of course, this is your state commitment. This isn't, we're not talking about border security necessarily on the border.
And I might add that it's on top of what we already appropriated, I think 110 to 120 million in the 2013 legislative session.
How has this changed for a positive, and how can we, as we're looking at solutions, incorporate this into our plan of action?
I'm going to save us just a little bit of time here because when Director McCraw gets up here, he's going to give you some very hard factual data and giving you name of surge operation. Here's the amount of criminal activity. Here's the amount of apprehensions that occurred. What I will tell you in a broad sense is it is astounding how you drive down those activities when you have that law enforcement presence, when you have the boots on the ground, and it truly makes a difference. And if we were able to do that from El Paso to Brownsville, I will suggest to you that it will have a likewise astounding impact on our border from the standpoint of folks on this side of the border will be substantially safer. And at some point in time, we'll have, and this is a conversation for another time too, but we'll have two administrations, one in the United States and one in Mexico, that they build a trusting relationship. And we can together, as we did in Colombia, deal with the drug cartels and the criminal element in Mexico and make that entire region, this entire region, safer and more prosperous.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Lady. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Corpus Christi, Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you, Chairman McCall. And as a former member of this committee and a representative of the Rio Grande Valley in the last term of Congress, it really means a lot to be here, be back among some old friends, and talk about some issues that have been troubling us since I've been elected to Congress. I do have two takeaways, I think, that really have stuck with me from this hearing. I think, Governor Perry, you pointed out accurately that border security needs to come first. The American people feel like a promise was broken by the Reagan administration with the last round of immigration, big round of immigration legislation, that the borders would be secured if we granted amnesty. We've got to regain that trust by securing the borders first. And I also think actions speak louder than words. They have telephones and internet in Central America, and when children and families come up here, they call back and say, yeah, we're going to be here for a while, it looks like, and they don't see them back in Central America. It encourages more people to come. As I see it, there are basically three classes of folks crossing the border illegally that we're dealing with. We're going to kind of set adults aside because I don't think we're really outside the scope of this hearing. But we have families with kids that come, and we have kids that come. And what I've learned down here is we treat them differently. Families with kids we process as quickly as we can. They're still put in these horribly overcrowded detention centers, but eventually they're released with a notice to appear and go down to Catholic Charities and then the local bus station and proceed on to wherever their eventual destination in the United States was at their expense. And with only a notice to appear, which we've seen very often they don't. The kids are another problem. You can't just set the kids loose. You've got to do something with them. So after CBP has 72 hours to deal with them, and then they're released to HHS, who tries to place them in a facility until they can find a parent or someone in the United States to take care of them. We'll set aside the argument of we should probably be looking for somebody in their home country to take care of them, but what has this done to Texas? We don't have the beds for this number of children. What's happening with that?
Well, and you bring up a concern that I have, and Representative Elmers, your hometown is getting a pretty good lashing right now by the first major hurricane of the season. I don't think we've had a hurricane in 4 years. Is that right, Sheila? I don't think we've had. It's been 4 at least. I mean, we've been blessed in that sense. What I worry about as the Chief Executive Officer, I can assure you that Kim Nim Kidd and Steve McCraw and John Nichols all have it on their mind. If we were to have a major event like they're having in North Carolina and South Carolina at this particular moment, along and hitting your constituents, Gene, they don't have a place to go.
So, Governor, do you think the other states need to step up and if they've got beds for these children? I mean, typically they're only there for a couple of weeks until we find an adult to do with them. What else do we do?
You know, the states have always been good about working with each other. And it didn't make any difference whether you were a Democrat governor or when Joe Manchin was the governor of West Virginia. He was one of the first people on the phone to me to offer assistance with some aviation assets. And Bobby Jindal, when Gustav came through. Bobby.
So we need to work here. I'm about out of time. I have one more question for you. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good to go.
So what the President has asked for recently is the ability to do expedited repatriation, more judges to handle some of these claims, and some money to pay for it. Those are kind of his 3 big asks in his last speech. As a conservative, do you have a problem with any one of those requests?
As an American, let me put it that way, and I don't think it matters whether you're a conservative or liberal, because this issue isn't about.
I think the only part we're going to argue about is where that money comes from. Yeah. Do we just turn on the printing presses and make it, or do we find it from somewhere else?
I think the dollars need to be spent on border security first, and I'm going to stay on that record, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the fact is, until we secure this border.
But we're still going to have the kids. If we had 100% border security, every child that, let's assume border security is we stop everybody within a mile of the border. We're still going to have people we're going to have to send back, and we're going to have to deal with those, especially the children.
I understand that. And we prioritize every day in Austin, Texas, about where we're going to expend our dollars and appropriate thusly. And I would suggest to you, you got a lot of smart people in Washington, D.C., and capable individuals, and you will appropriate where the priorities are. And if the priority is to be able to expedite those young people back to the countries that they come from, then I suggest that's what will occur. I hope that is, in fact, a priority with this administration and with this Congress.
If we can't find the money somewhere else, it's basically saying that there's nothing we do in government less important than this. And I think we'll all agree there are a lot of things we do in government that are less important than this.
I'm thinking you're correct.
Thank you.
Hey, Governor, thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for your leadership. Let me just say this for the record. This committee passed in a bipartisan way, which is almost unheard of in the climate in Washington, a border security bill. But yet it has not seen the light of day on the floor. I think if anything out of this crisis, it demands that we put that bill on the floor and pass it. With that, Governor, thanks
Would the
again.
gentleman yield for a moment?
And you got a
for me
great
to-
team behind you. I yield to the gentlelady for.
I thank the gentleman. This was a bill that we worked with extensively. Let me make mention of Ms. Miller, who was my chair on the Board of Security Committee. I think it's important for Texas to know that we have passed out of the Homeland Security Committee a very extensive bill that responds to concerns by the state and governor as well, but also has a humanitarian element to it, particularly on the area of the question of human trafficking. So I would support the gentleman from Texas that we pass that bill. I know you can't cause a bill to be passed in the House of Representatives, but I would encourage the Speaker to put that bill on the floor and for us to be able to vote on it. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank you, Mr. Governor, for your service to the state and to the nation. Thank you very much.
Can I just
Absolutely.
say again as you leave, this may be a monumental moment for this country, because if there's one issue, I think America is begging to see Washington really work and work well, and to address a major issue that faces us. And this committee has that opportunity, Democrats and Republicans alike, working together to find a solution to this great challenge of our time. And I have truly enjoyed sitting in front of you, and I have great hope that you, with the work that you're about to do, working together, can send a message all across this country that not only is Washington a functional place, but that men and women can sit together. We can disagree on some areas, but find that middle ground and find that solution to this issue that challenges us. God bless you and thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Clerk will call up the next panel.
Yeah, I'm going to follow you out there. I got
We have to can't keep this. I'm going to be a little disciplined time on this because we got to catch a flight.
No one was making a bill in Paris, so. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Hey, I only did, I take it out for Congress and state legislature. I don't wear it on the road, man. Hey, Eddie, what are you doing over there, man?
I am told I'm leaving. Did
Okay.
you need me here?
Well, I always love the way you look. No, I think I'm fine.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'll just, yeah, I'll defer, and I doubt if they even talk. They're not going to ask about so much things they talk about. Yeah, they're not going to.
All right.
Yeah, okay, right, that's it. Eddie, I don't know where they're going to put yours, man. Where's your sign going to go?
Thank you so much for being here today. He's testifying on behalf of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bishop Seitz is testifying on behalf of the Committee of Migration of the conference, which sets broad policies and direction for the church's work in the area of migration. Witnesses' full statements will appear in the record. Chair now recognizes Chief Oakes for his testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Jackson, Lee, and distinguished members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about U.S. Customs and Border Protection's efforts to address the recent rise of unaccompanied children and others crossing our border into the Rio Grande Valley. As you know, Secretary Johnson testified on June 24th before the Homeland Security Committee on these very issues, and my testimony today echoes and reaffirms his comments. We face an urgent situation in the Rio Grande Valley. Last fiscal year, CBP apprehended more than 24,000 unaccompanied children at the border. By mid-June of this fiscal year, that number has doubled to more than 52,000. From countries from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras make up 3/4 of that migration. I am on the front lines of this effort. The Border Patrol has done heroic work during difficult and challenging conditions. I have personally seen firsthand the Border Patrol agents stepping up to ensure that we remain vigilant and effective in securing the border while also providing care for people who are desperate, many of whom are children and women traveling with children. I am proud of our efforts, and I am particularly proud of the men and women of the United States Border Patrol who daily exemplify the highest commitment to service to our country. As Secretary Johnson said on June 24th, this is a humanitarian issue as much as it is a matter of border security. We are talking about large numbers of children without their parents who have arrived at our border. How we treat these children in particular is a reflection of our laws and our values. Therefore, to address the situation, the Department's three-pronged fold strategy is to process the increased tide of unaccompanied children through the system as quickly as possible, stem the increased tide of illegal migration to the Rio Grande Valley, and do these things in a manner consistent with our laws and values as Americans. The Department has taken a number of steps, including declaring a Level 4 condition of readiness, so additional resources from across the Department are available. On June 1st, the President directed Secretary Johnson to establish a unified coordination group to bring to bear the assets of the entire federal government. The group includes the Department of Homeland Security and all of its components, Departments of Health and Human Services, Defense, Justice, State, and the General Services Administration. Secretary Johnson in turn designated FEMA Administrator Fugate to serve as the federal coordinating official for this U.S. government-wide response. Under Administrator Fugate's supervision and leadership, there are now more than 140 interagency personnel stationed in FEMA's National Response Coordination Center directed to this effort. The broad range of these efforts is detailed in my testimony. Of particular note, given the influx of unaccompanied children in the RGV, we have increased CBP staffing and detailed 115 experienced agents from less active sectors to augment operations in the Rio Grande Valley. Secretary Johnson has also authorized sending another 150 Border Patrol agents based on his review of our operations. These additional agents allow the Rio Grande Valley flexibility needed to achieve more interdiction effectiveness and increase CBP's operational footprint in our targeted zones. In early May, Secretary Johnson directed the development of the Southern Border and Approaches campaign planning effort that is putting together a strategic framework to further enhance security of our southern border. We also have ramped up our efforts with the governments from the countries which these people are coming, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and also Mexico. The Secretary will be traveling to Guatemala next week, and we have launched a public messaging campaign in Central America to discourage migrants from taking this dangerous journey. Finally, we will continue to work closely with Congress on this problem and keep you all informed. DHS is updating members and staff as the situation evolves and with conference calls, and we are facilitating site visits to Border Patrol facilities in Texas and Arizona. Secretary Johnson has directed his staff and agency leaders to be forthright in bringing him every conceivable and lawful option for consideration to address this problem, in cooperation with other agencies and our federal government that are dedicating resources to this effort. With the support of Congress and in cooperation with governments of Mexico and Central America, we believe we can stem this tide. Thank you very much, and I will take any questions as they come.
Thanks, Chief. Chair recognizes Colonel McCraw.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Jackson Lee, Thank the opportunity to be here today. I'll try to make it quick. Bottom line is that there are consequences for an unsecured border with Mexico. This is the latest consequence. Some of those consequences has been the emergence of Mexican cartels. 6 of the 8 of the cartels operate in Texas, command and control elements. They turned, parts of Texas into a transshipment center for the nation as it relates to drugs and human smuggling and trafficking. Only that, in terms we lead the nation right now in terms of pushing through marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. So if you have a drug problem in your state, in your city, in your community, you've got a Zeta problem, you've got a Gulf cartel problem, you've got a Vicente Carrillo problem. And that's been that way for a number of years. So we talk about in terms of the safety or security as it relates to, transnational criminal organizations, specifically the cartels. There's never been an organized crime group in this nation's history, anywhere in the world, that's been more vicious, that has adapted and utilized and embraced terrorist tactics to intimidate and coerce the people, the journalists, the government, that have butchered over 80,000 men, women, and children since 2006. And these are the organizations that operate in Texas right now. They leverage transnational gangs. They work with our prison gangs. This is one thing when you talk about working across the lines. We've got investigations where the Gulf Cartel is working with the Mexican Mafia, Chinese-based gang out of Houston, and also the Aryan Brotherhood. It's the one area, where race doesn't matter. It's because it's about money. And what these cartels are focused on is making money. It's not ideology. And they come, they cross, they own these corridors between our ports of entry and on our bridges. And their whole purpose is to make money. And you can talk, you don't have to take my word or Texas's word from it. You talk to your other colonels in your states. Talk to your chiefs of police. Talk to your sheriffs. Strategies that work and proven over the last several decades. And one of those strategies is saturation patrols and high clusters of crime. And when your motive in crime happens to be organized smuggling, then the impact you can have can be dramatic if you're willing to commit the resources and conduct sustained saturation patrols around the clock. And Border Patrol is an outstanding organization. The men and women are on the front line of our national defense these days. And bottom line is you haven't given them enough resources to do their job. I don't know what anybody says. It's a matter of math. If they can't sustain saturation patrols on the river, the battle to secure it is not in Austin or Washington, D.C., it's on the river itself. And if they don't have those resources around the clock, then it's going to have an impact on our communities. And impacts in our communities is, we talk about, well, crime is up, crime is down. Bottom line, it's not safer. And I'll use as an example, is that where else in the country, and you get on a river and have law enforcement officers shot at, over 108 times. Where did that happen? I don't see it up in Canada the last time I checked, or on the Great Lakes. We don't see, in terms of these human and drug stash houses, where you cram, 110 people into a 1,200 square foot box, and you engage in these stash house extortions and kidnappings. They've already paid their money to get here, and you can rest assured there's a certain percentage of the females that are in there going to be sexually assaulted. And bottom line is it's going to be extortions before they get out. And they don't mind starving them and keeping them maintained in that location. And this happens here. It happens in Houston now, as you're well aware, Ms. Jackson-Lee, in terms of human trafficking. We just took down a case where there was 10 illegal immigrants who were running this operation. They've been running it for several years. And we rescued 13 victims. And I say victims because these were young children that were enticed, lured, and brought in to work in the underground economy as nannies, as in domestic service capacities, in restaurants, promised that they got here, they were raped, beaten, and compelled into prostitution. And this is the type of activity you have when you open your borders and allow crime to come in. Because another part of that crime that comes in is criminal aliens. And we talk about this crisis. It is a crisis. It's a crisis, them traversing from Guatemala to the U.S. is the crisis. And make no mistake about Guatemala. I mean, the cartels are in Guatemala. Okay? The Zetas have contributed to the transnational gang problem in Guatemala and Central America. So we've got this transnational crime. We've got this globalization of crime that's going on, but it's being fueled by an unending demand for forced labor in this country and drugs. That's what's enriching the cartels. And with their terrorist tactics, it's having an impact in our communities. And where else in the state of Texas do we have these pursuits where people are so in fear of their lives that they'll run and as soon as they get the lights on in such a dangerous way that they splash in the Rio Grande River. And if they don't, there's consequences to it. You don't see it in locations like that. Home invasions. Where do you get where cliques come together and go after houses, and when they get into the houses, it's a takeover. And guess what? It's not misdemeanor robbery, just because they miss the cartels. Many times it's innocent individuals, as the sheriff can attest to, that they come across. Pseudo cop stops, public corruption. I mean, the cartels, seek to undermine the rule of law in Texas. And there's not a Texan that deserves to have, cartel and transnational gangs traversing across their lands. And they should not ever feel in fear. And what happens in the Rio Grande Valley, which is the center of gravity right now for drug and human trafficking in this nation, doesn't stay in the Rio Grande Valley. It's in North Carolina. It's in California. I mean, you realize in California you got the, well, he's not here anymore, but they got to deal with the Tijuana cartel. But guess what? You've got other cartels to deal with. So it doesn't just stay in the Rio Grande Valley. And it's important. Can we do it? Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, the message, only one message right here to the Gulf Cartel, who controls this corridor. Hey, we're going to pour troopers and Texas Rangers, okay, and agents into this area until they shut down. And they'll shut down, I guarantee you. And our state legislature, they're not going to give you a hand, at the end of the day, there's accountability. And they want to know how we spend it, they want to know what we spent it on, and what we achieved in spending it. And the last part of that, what's the return on investment? Did we secure it? Do we make Texans safer? Do we make the nation safer? And I've got no doubt they're not afraid of providing a little tough love on accountability and feedback. But I'm also guaranteeing that this is axiomatic. If you give Border Patrol the resources they need, Texas is going to be a lot better. There's not a Texas state legislature that I've talked to that wants to spend money on border security. They don't. Education, transportation, health care, or health. That is exactly what they want to spend it on. And they don't like the idea, but at the same point, they made no mistake about it, is that we've got an obligation to secure between the ports of entry and support Border Patrol, and we're going to take care of Texans. And that concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Steve. Sheriff Guerra.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Eddie Guerra. I'm the Hidalgo County Sheriff. I have over 20 years serving in various capacity in law enforcement in South Texas. I would like to begin by thanking you for giving me the opportunity to testify before you here today. I have under my command nearly 800 personnel, including sheriff deputies, detention officers, and administrative support staff. As sheriff, my primary duty lies with the preservation of peace, which can be challenging because of our proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border. Hidalgo is the 8th largest county in the state of Texas, and we're responsible for protecting the residents of the unincorporated parts of the county and preserving the laws of our state. To put it another way, Hidalgo County is 1,583 square miles, and we patrol 75 miles of the international border. There are 3 things that I would like you to understand about our current situation. 1, that the recent surge of illegal immigration from Central America has proven to be a challenge for law enforcement, and especially for our federal partners. Number 2, that although it is a federal issue, local law enforcement is impacted by the surge of illegal immigration. And 3, that the threat to law enforcement and the safety is not coming from these immigrants, but rather from the criminal elements that are taking advantage of them and of the situation. I believe that the immigration issue that I am here testifying on before you today is a federal issue. That isn't to say that we will not share in the responsibility. In fact, we frequently partner with our local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies and continue to cooperate with our federal partners today by using state and federal grant money in support of their mission. But the Sheriff's Department cannot be associated in the public's eye as the enforcer of immigration law. That not only is counterproductive, but actually put lives at risk, and oftentimes undocumented persons hesitate to come forward as victims of crimes for fear of deportation. My directive to deputies are that we will assist our federal partners in conducting rescue operations and in dismantling the transnational criminal organizations that exploit these immigrants. The influx of immigrants have impacted my office in very specific ways. Currently, the family units and OTM immigrants crossing the border are turning themselves in. Their only crime is entering our country illegally. The vast majority are not committing any state crime. Should one of my deputies come across an undocumented person, we refer them to U.S. Border Patrol, which responds and takes them into custody. My greatest concern is the immigrant death that we respond to. There are dozens of immigrants who have lost their lives trying to fulfill their hope of finding freedom and the opportunity here. In 2012, we responded to 19 immigrant deaths. In 2013, we responded to 25 immigrant deaths, which is a 31.5% increase from the previous year. This year, we have already responded to 14 immigrant deaths. Bodies are found in the river or in the brush, many in deplorable condition. Many of these immigrants die from drowning and heat exposures. But the hardest to take are the death of children. Most recently, we responded to the death of an 11-year-old boy from Guatemala. His decomposed body was found in the brush just a quarter of a mile away from a residential neighborhood where he could have sought help. Make no mistake about it, the South Texas conditions are harsh and unrelenting, and the trek, as in the case of this 11-year-old child, was deadly. Earlier, I commented that the threat to law enforcement and safety is not coming from these immigrants, but rather from the criminal element that takes advantage of them and of the situation. My agency's response to various calls for service that includes false imprisonment, sexual assaults, kidnapping, criminal mischief, home invasions, and burglaries. For the most part, the offenders are not the undocumented immigrants coming into the United States. They're the victims. The offenders are the transnational criminal organizations. Time and time, my staff brief me on stash houses in which these undocumented persons are held, often against their will in deplorable condition and traded like commodities among these criminal organizations for profit. At times, these human smugglers sexually assault the women who are victims and often feel that they have no voice because of their legal status, so the crime goes unreported. There are instances where criminals will hold ransom undocumented persons. Once again, some of these crimes will go unreported. On the occasions in which undocumented persons are taken into the ranch lands of South Texas to traverse the backcountry, the undocumented persons have no choice but to break into homes in search of water and food. The South Texas conditions are beautiful, but yet they're harsh. As I previously stated, I am willing to accept my share of the responsibility, and we have managed the situation only with the cooperation of our state, local, and federal partners. It is my hope that the increased attention this issue brings much-needed resources to the area. I realize the challenges that immigration reform brings, but for me, these victims are more than just statistics. They have faces and they have names, and I firmly believe the solution lies in change in policy. With that, I would like to close once again by thanking you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for the opportunity to come before you today, and I stand ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Chair recognizes Judge Garcia.
Thank you, sir. And members of the committee, Mr. Chair, thank you for making time to be here with us and looking at this issue close hand. As county judge, I feel compelled to do my Chamber of Commerce thing. We're the 8th largest county in Texas. We're about 900,000 population. We've been described by Forbes magazine as one of the best areas in the country to do business. We have been experiencing tremendous growth due in large part to our geographical location. We're the entryway from Mexico, as you're now realizing, and all over the country. We are the closest entry point to the United States from Central American countries. That is one of the reasons we are currently experiencing this situation. I've been listening. I've got prepared comments, but I wanted to divert a little bit from it because I'm concerned that we may be confusing the issue. I know that Congressman Farenthold, in my mind, and at least wanted to dwell on it, but the issue, as I see it, is not that we're considering before this committee here today. Is not what to do with how do we stop the drugs from coming, how do we stop the human trafficking from coming. The issue, I thought, was very simple. What are we going to do to address this issue of the influx of undocumented illegal children that are coming to our country from Central America? And in my experience, in my mind, they do not create a public health crisis for our area. They do not, we're not dealing with drug dealers. We're not dealing with terrorists. I don't care how many more Border Patrolmen you get down here and put them up hand by hand covering the entire border. There's no need to. These people don't need to be followed and chased to be apprehended. They cross that river and they're out there looking for the Border Patrolmen to turn themselves in so that they can be documented. The issue here is one of policy, as I see it. And that policy is related to this, as has been very correctly stated by Governor Perry and many members of this committee, we are a nation of laws. And right now we have a law in the books that gives these individuals certain rights. And one of those rights is when they land in our country, when they cross that river and they're on U.S. soil, before they're deported back, they need to be provided with a hearing. And that hearing is taking 2 to 3 years. And as Congressman Salmon correctly pointed out, actions speak louder than words. They're saying, they're believing in their country that they can stay here. I mean, all you got to do is get there. They give you a piece of paper. They ask you questions, and you can go on about your business. Well, if you really want to stop the influx of illegal, undocumented children, you need to have quicker deportation hearings, detention hearings. You need to put some of those $2 billion towards hiring more judges, towards hiring more public defenders, towards those resources, towards addressing the issue where they can get in and get out. You send them back, and they'll start getting the message when the bus loads come back, when the train loads, if that's the procedure, or the plane load of children are coming back to their country. I just hope that we don't confuse the issue of how do we address the situation of drugs coming in or the situation of terrorists coming in. Now, I provided you with some photographs. One of them shows the map, how clearly it is to get direct line from Central America to Texas. And the others are some pictures of people coming to America, as Neil Diamond would say. And, none of those individuals, in my mind, or in anybody's mind that knows something, that understands the situation, believes that they're thinking, we're going to South Texas. They're saying we're going to South Texas, get that permiso, and then go on about and go to North Carolina and other parts of the country. And that's what's happening. If we really want to address this by talking about action speaking louder than words, you need to address that issue, getting them back as soon as possible so that that action would send a message throughout the countries that it's not going to happen. There's no free ride. You're not going to become a U.S. citizen by getting there. I also wanted to comment and publicly commend our local chief of the Border Patrol sector, Kevin Oakes, for his policies and for his, specifically for the policy of being transparent, of immediately realizing, I think that's what's helped us in the way we have responded to this situation versus what's going on in California, is that he came forth and wanted to meet with the leadership of the county so that he could explain and give us accurate information about what's going on, information that we could then rely upon and feel safe and feel secure. These are kids. They're not drug dealers. They're not terrorists. And then they're being treated accordingly with the laws that are presently in place under our country, and which they have a right to due process or whatever term we want to use to describe it. And if we want to change the laws, that's another thing, but I understand the issue of comprehensive immigration reform and how difficult it may be between now and November. But we also want to thank our local Catholic charities and our county residents for stepping up. We have expended approximately $60,000 in local resources. We don't know how much longer this is going to last. We would appreciate any portion of that we can be reimbursed for. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Chair recognizes Bishop Seitz.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Jackson Lee, for the opportunity to testify today on unaccompanied children entering the United States. I've been called to serve the church as a bishop of a diocese on the border. My challenge is, to the best of my ability and under the guidance of the church, to apply the gospel teachings of Jesus to present-day situations. In visiting with these children in my diocese and in their home countries, I've witnessed the human consequences of the violence they have endured. Mr. Chairman, as you know, Texans have big hearts. This is particularly true of Texans who live on the border. I've seen it. They understand the migration issue better than most, and my experience in El Paso is that they show compassion to migrants, particularly children, who are fleeing desperate situations. It is my prayer that you and this committee will reflect that compassion and sense of justice in seeking humane solutions to this current migrant challenge. This challenge tests the moral character of the nation. It is a test we must not fail. Other nations are watching to see how we handle this matter. Our moral authority in the world is at stake. Let me say up front that U.S. Catholic bishops support the right of our nation to control her borders and to enforce the rule of law. Migration to our country should be orderly, safe, and controlled, consistent with the common good. This is why the U.S. bishops have supported reform of our immigration system, so that the rule of law can be restored in a humanitarian manner. We hope that the House will understand this call and take up immigration reform as soon as possible. In our view, Mr. Chairman, the current challenge we are facing is driven primarily by factors in Central America and Mexico, most specifically the rise of violence against children fomented by organized criminal networks, including drug cartels. They act with impunity, threatening families and coercing children and youth to join their membership or face violence and even death. There are more young children arriving, many who are young girls aged 13 or younger. While there are a variety of ongoing push factors, Mr. Chairman, including daunting poverty and the desire for family reunifications, violence is the straw that stirs the drink. Otherwise, it is unlikely we would see such large numbers of unaccompanied children on our doorstep. Mr. Chairman, I would like to summarize our own recommendations, both short and long term, on this issue. These are listed in detail in our written testimony. Over the long term, Mr. Chairman, there must be a concerted effort to address the root causes of this exodus, specifically the rampant violence in that region. As a part of this effort, humane reintegration practices and prevention programs should complement anti-violence efforts. For short-term response, we recommend the following. Unaccompanied children should be expeditiously placed in child-friendly shelters and not warehoused in CBP border facilities. Families should not be detained in restrictive settings, but placed in alternative community settings as quickly as possible. Unaccompanied children should not be subject to expedited removal and should be appointed counsel so they can navigate our complex legal system. Sufficient funding should be provided to care for these children. so that federal agencies do not have to raid other budgets, such as the refugee budget. Pastoral services should be provided to these children and families, including visitation by priests, ministers, and other religious. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to relay one story of why children are fleeing from their homes. In November, I led a delegation of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to visit El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico to look at this phenomenon. We met many children who told us their stories. At the Center for Detainee Children in Tapachula, Mexico, we met two boys, ages 15 and 17, who were clean-cut, respectful young men. They had recently arrived from San Pedro Sula, Honduras, a city with the highest murder rate in the world, higher than Kabul, Afghanistan, or Damascus, Syria. Organized crime members had attempted to recruit them and had told them that they and their families would be killed if they did not cooperate. The families of these young men quickly insisted they leave and flee to safety. Now, as they waited for repatriation to Honduras, they told us they would not return to their home city, to what they felt was certain death. They would try again. Any risk they faced seemed to be a better option than returning to their home. This story is typical of many children coming north. It also shows the decisions, the difficult decisions faced by parents and families who are unable to protect their children in their homes and communities. This was brought home to me by a mother our delegation met at a repatriation center in El Salvador, who told us, "I would rather my child die on the journey, seeking safety in the United States, than on my front doorstep." Mr. Chairman, from our experience, it is clear that a deterrence strategy, including expedited removal of these children, places this vulnerable population at even greater risk and will not necessarily stem the child migrant flow. In our view, the forces that drive them are greater than the dangers they face on the journey. Rather, we must fix the root causes at play, particularly the violence, and in the meantime offer protection to those children who warrant it, consistent with domestic law. To not do so undermines our values as a nation. In conclusion, I ask you to consider the individual stories of these vulnerable child migrants. We've heard many today. And open your minds and hearts to their plight, while seeking meaningful and long-term solutions. I ask you to respond to the needs of these children, not to turn them away or ostracize them. Americans are a compassionate people. We should not turn our back on these children. We, the church, stand ready to work with you to pursue just solutions to this humanitarian challenge.
Thank you, Bishop. Let me just say that I appreciate your leadership and the Catholic Church's leadership. I think there's a role to play. We can work with you. The intervention to stop the movement in the first place, to make that dangerous journey. But we also applaud your humanitarian efforts here in the United States. We often like to think that we do God's work here on earth, but you truly do the Lord's work here. So we thank you for that, sir. Because of our departure time, which is 3:30, to make our airplane, I'm going to have to limit everybody to 3 minutes. I will try to lead by example as the chairman, as hard as that may be. Let me just first, Chief, people ask me, how did this happen? How do we get here? 50,000 unaccompanied children since October. How did this happen, and what do we need to do to stop it?
Well, I think it's been, as everybody has testified on the panel, a combination of all those factors. It's a combination of poverty, it's socioeconomic conditions, it's violence in the particular countries, it's all those factors, it's the hope of freedom and a better life in the United States. It's all those factors that draw many of these people. And over the course of the last 30 years as a Border Patrol agent, I've seen many iterations of this with different bodies and with different groups and demographics of people that have come to this country for a better way of life. And the way you stop it is by Congress and the American people and the non-governmental organizations and the faith-based organizations and diplomatic efforts in concert to come up with a comprehensive understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and then solve the problem that way.
I think you mentioned also before in 2006 we faced a similar dilemma with Brazil, and I think we sent a very strong message of deterrence that if you come, you cannot stay, and I think we were very effective. Now, of course, that was before the 2008 law that we're under today, but I think you would agree with me that actually worked.
Yes, sir. In terms of the Brazilians that you were talking about, we had an influx of Brazilians, and over the course of the last 3 decades in the Rio Grande Valley, you've seen an influx of OTMs, each decade, and the problem has typically been resolved by taking a look at that body, looking at detention, looking at bonds, and looking at working with the country, especially in terms of Brazilian. The Mexican government did a pretty good job of, reducing the number of waivers and not letting them travel free through Mexico to the United States. I think Mexico needs to change that policy, and they need to step up to the plate. Steve McCraw, you and I have worked on this for over a decade. You're FBI SAC out of San Antonio as a federal prosecutor. We've talked about securing the border. Seems like forever. I think now is the time to get it done. This crisis is a call for action. I think Congress, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Congress fulfills that responsibility. But can you talk a little bit about, you had a plan, a strategic plan you put forward to the governor sent to the President of the United States back in 2009, detailing how this can be done. In the limited time I have, can you explain that plan?
Well, bottom line is what I already talked about in terms of resources. It's dedicating sufficient number of resources between the ports of entry, around the clock, saturate the high threat areas, sustain it until they can't come, because they don't come here for anything other than profit. Bottom line, on the human smuggling side and on the drug trafficking side. They're not going to sustain the risks, and every time we have surged, we have pushed back along those lines. The plan involved that we produced for the governor, 1,000 Texas National Guard troops at that point in time because of LPOPs. And keep in mind, we use Texas military forces every day on the border. The UH-72s, the UH-60s, we use their special ops in our Ranger recon teams because they bring a set of skills that can complement and support us. And even in terms of the LPOP, important listening post, observation post, very important when you're dealing with the type of counter-surveillance and surveillance that the cartels are conducting on our operations along those lines. So it's value add. That would give us 1,000 at that point in time. And of course, the supplement would have been would have been diverting resources into the Rio Grande Valley, and also at that point the Laredo sector as well, based upon what we were seeing from our Border Patrol partners.
And in closing, the way I see it is that at the end of the day protects the children we saw today, protects the 3 little girls I saw who almost drowned in the river, and that's just one example of so many. Protects them from sexual abuse and trafficking. I think this committee and the working group needs to work towards that effort. With that, the Chair recognizes the ranking member.
I think the Chairman is correct that we need to work together. Let me thank all of the witnesses very much for your very insightful and important testimony. I've worked over the years on human trafficking and human smuggling, and none of that will be diminished in light of the title of this hearing, dealing with unaccompanied children. And that is the issue. I want to make it very clear that no one is undermining the importance of national security. We're in intelligence meetings all the time. We recognize the communities that are at the border. You need to have the assurance that we have not forgotten that we do have terrorists who want to intrude on our border. But what we have today is unaccompanied children. I want to ask Chief Oakes, you interact with our distinguished Mr. McCraw, the Director of Department of Public Safety, FBI, DEA, you interact with ATF and others as a federal law enforcement. Is there any diminishing in your mind in the fight against drug cartels who are smuggling, who are trafficking, who are terrorists, who are creating violence on the other side of the border, and that they may seep over here? Is there any diminishing on the part of the Border Patrol in those efforts?
I can tell you that, anytime there's a change in, a massive noticeable change in operations, you'll have a little bit of a degradation in operations, but those are quickly made up, as you allude to with our partnerships with Department of Public Safety, who in my estimation is one of the finest law enforcement agencies I've worked with.
So what you're saying is that with that recognition that there has been some altering, you get right to it to make sure that you rise to the occasion to make sure that this area and the nation's border are safe.
Absolutely. You have to adjust your strategies, and you have to, recycle your forces and look at your deployment plans and bring in additional assets.
And you have been doing that?
Yes, ma'am,
And with the question about lesser numbers in this region versus Southern California or El Paso,